Only 12 people witnessed it, and none of them ever spoke about it the same way again. A private sparring session. No cameras, no rules, just two fighters in a room that would later become legend whispered about in martial arts circles for decades. It happened on a rain-soaked night in Los Angeles, 1969. Bruce Lee against an Olympic gold medalist in Judo, a man the world never expected to meet the dragon. A man who would walk into that room absolutely certain he was about to break the undefeated streak that had made Bruce Lee a living god. But something happened in those 7 minutes that changed everything. His name was Kenji Nakamura. 6'2", 240 pounds of pure muscle and Olympic pedigree. He'd thrown men twice his size across mats on the international circuit. His judo resume was flawless. Gold medal, multiple championship belts, respect from every martial arts federation in the world. And he was angry. The anger had started 3 weeks earlier when Bruce Lee appeared on a Los Angeles television show and made a statement that everyone heard, but Kenji felt in his chest. Size means nothing. Technique, speed, and precision, these are real power. A smaller man will always defeat a larger man if he understands the principle of leverage. Kenji watched that interview in his training facility in Pasadena, surrounded by his students. He watched Bruce say it with absolute certainty. No ego, just fact. But Kenji had an ego. He'd spent 17 years perfecting judo, 17 years throwing men who weighed 280 pounds, 17 years believing that mass and gravity were the ultimate laws of physics, laws that could not be broken. And this skinny Chinese kid with film star looks was on television saying those laws didn't matter. By the end of that week, one of Bruce's students received a message. Kenji Nakamura challenges Bruce Lee to a private match. No rules, no cameras. Loser admits publicly that their style is inferior. Bruce read the message once. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He simply wrote back, 7 p.m., Saturday, my training facility. The night Kenji arrived, the sky was splitting open. Rain hammered the parking lot outside the training facility. The building was dark, except for a single light on in the back, the sparring room. Kenji walked through the corridor, his gi still damp from the rain, his Olympic medal hanging in his car like a guarantee of what was about to happen. Bruce's facility was small, almost humble. The sparring room was exactly what Kenji expected. Wooden floors, mirrors on one wall, barely enough space for 2 men to move with full extension. Bruce was already there, bare-chested, wearing simple black pants, no belt, no emblem, no decoration. Just a human being standing in the center of the room. Kenji was shocked by how small he looked. The Olympic champion had expected more, expected to feel the presence, expected to sense danger. But Bruce looked almost fragile. 130 pounds of bone and sinew standing in front of a man who outweighed him by 110 pounds. It was almost unfair. "Thank you for coming," Bruce said simply. His accent was light, almost undetectable. Kenji didn't respond. He rolled his shoulders. The Olympics had taught him that confidence was a weapon, and right now he was an arsenal. Bruce took a step back and bowed. Kenji bowed. Neither man moved their eyes from the other. Kenji had spent the previous week studying Bruce's fights. He'd watched the footage over and over. Bruce fighting street fighters in Hong Kong, Bruce fighting larger opponents in tournament matches. And Kenji had found what he was looking for: patterns. Bruce favored his left side. His right leg was fractionally slower when launching kicks. He relied on speed, yes, but speed could be countered if you understood the geometry of distance. In judo, distance was everything. Judo was about reading space, controlling angles, and using an opponent's own momentum against them. Kenji had thrown men who were faster than Bruce. The Olympics demanded it. But there was something else Kenji had noticed in those videos, something that made him pause while rewatching them at 2 a.m. in his empty facility. Every man Bruce had ever fought had underestimated him. Every single one. They'd all made the same mistake. They'd assumed that size supposed to matter. They'd carried that assumption into the ring like a weapon, and by the time they realized it didn't, by the time they understood that they were fighting something completely different, it was too late.
They began slowly. Kenji moved in with a testing jab, just to feel the space between them, to measure Bruce's response time. Bruce slipped it without apparent effort, his head moving millimeters off center. Kenji threw again, and again, testing, measuring. Bruce evaded each strike with the same effortless precision. No wasted movement, no dramatic displays, just complete awareness of where Kenji's hands were going before they arrived. 5 minutes. 10 exchanges. Kenji was already breathing harder. The larger man was beginning to feel the pattern. Bruce wasn't just dodging strikes, he was stealing Kenji's distance, moving in and out of range with such perfect timing that the Olympic champion was starting to swing at ghosts. Then Bruce threw his first strike. A palm strike aimed at Kenji's chest. Kenji's reflexes, honed by a decade and a half of combat, fired automatically. He grabbed the incoming wrist and pivoted his body, executing the foundational judo movement he'd thrown thousands of times, the seonage, the shoulder throw. It should have worked. It didn't. What happened next happened so fast that Kenji's mind couldn't actually process it in real time. He felt Bruce's weight distribution change, not resist, not fight back, but shift in a way that made his own momentum suddenly dangerous to his own balance. Instead of flying over Bruce's shoulder as planned, Kenji felt his body sliding sideways, felt his grip on the wrist become impossible to maintain, felt his own physics working against him. He landed on the mat hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. For 3 seconds, both men were still. Kenji's mind was racing. That shouldn't have happened. That couldn't have happened. The mechanics of judo were immutable. A man couldn't simply... He stood up, breathing, focused. Something had shifted in his understanding. He was no longer testing. He was no longer playing out a script that had already been written 100 times before. He was actually fighting. The next exchange lasted 8 seconds. Kenji came in lower this time, abandoning the standing exchanges, committing to his specialty, the takedown. His hands shot for Bruce's legs with Olympic precision, his timing perfect, his technique flawless. For the first time in the match, Bruce appeared to struggle. For less than a second. His hands pushed downwards against Kenji's shoulders with force that shouldn't have been possible from that angle, that position, that leverage. Kenji felt his center of gravity being crushed downward, felt the mat rising to meet his face, but in the fraction of a second before impact, Bruce's grip changed. Instead of throwing him, instead of following through with a finishing move that would have ended it, Bruce executed something Kenji had never seen before. A controlled descent that used Kenji's own committed momentum to place him gently on the mat, but with such perfect positioning that escape was geometrically impossible. Bruce didn't need to apply pressure. Kenji simply couldn't move. Bruce leaned close to Kenji's ear. His voice was calm, almost kind. Do you understand now? No aggression, no gloating, just a simple question from a man who was showing, not telling. Kenji understood. It wasn't about size, it wasn't about strength, it wasn't about speed alone or technique alone or power alone. It was about something deeper, something almost invisible. The ability to read what was happening before it happened, to move in ways that made an opponent's own weapons work against them, to understand physics at such a fundamental level that the rules everyone else followed simply didn't apply. Bruce released him. They sparred for 3 more minutes. Neither man landed another direct strike. It was almost a conversation at that point. Bruce demonstrating principles, Kenji finally beginning to see them. When they finished, Kenji bowed. Not out of tradition this time, out of genuine respect. The rain was still falling outside. Neither man spoke much. Kenji gathered his things, his medal still hanging in his car, suddenly feeling like it meant something completely different than it had that morning. As he reached the door, Bruce said something Kenji would think about for the rest of his life. Size and strength are gifts, but awareness is a choice. Kenji Nakamura never spoke publicly about that night. Not once. His students asked, his colleagues asked, the martial arts community, which thrived on gossip and legend, kept waiting for him to break his silence, to either validate his ego or admit his defeat. He never did. Instead, something changed in Kenji that couldn't be explained by words. He closed his judo academy 6 months later. Not in failure, the academy was thriving. But something in him had shifted so fundamentally that returning to what he'd always done felt like living in a lie. He moved to Northern California and opened a small dojo. The sign outside read, "Mind over Might." His new students noticed immediately that Kenji didn't teach judo the way it was traditionally taught. He emphasized principles over techniques, flow over force, timing over power. He spoke about consciousness and awareness in ways that made no sense until the moment they suddenly did, usually when a smaller student threw them effortlessly across the mat. "How did you do that?" they'd ask. Kenji would smile and say the same thing every time. "I learned it from someone who understood everything I didn't." He never mentioned Bruce Lee by name. But his students eventually figured it out. Within martial arts circles, the rumor spread like wildfire. The Olympic judo champion was defeated in 7 minutes by Bruce Lee. In a private match, no rules. The story mutated as it traveled. Some versions said Kenji was hospitalized. Others claimed Bruce broke his arm. One particularly dramatic retelling suggested Kenji never trained again, a psychological defeat so complete that he abandoned martial arts entirely. None of it was true. But the truth was somehow more powerful, because the truth was this: a man at the absolute peak of his discipline, at the summit of Olympic achievement, had encountered someone operating on a completely different level of understanding. And instead of denying it, instead of making excuses, Kenji had submitted to the lesson. That's what spread through the underground. Not that Bruce had won, but that Kenji had learned. Bruce never mentioned the fight either. Not in interviews, not in his teaching, not in the films he was starting to make with increasing frequency. It was as if the match had never happened, as if it existed only in the space between memory and myth. But his philosophy shifted immediately after Kenji. Before Kenji, Bruce spoke about martial arts as combat efficiency, speed versus strength, technique versus size. It was practical, it was tactical. After Kenji, something else emerged. Bruce began speaking about adaptation, about reading an opponent not with eyes, but with something deeper: intuition, awareness, a kind of martial consciousness that couldn't be taught in forms or techniques, only awakened through understanding. "The moment you think you know what your opponent will do," Bruce said in a teaching session recorded 6 months after the Kenji match, "you've already lost. You must be like water, responsive, aware, empty of assumption." His students noticed he was quoting this more frequently, emphasizing it with an intensity that suggested recent revelation, but they had no idea where it came from. Only one person knew. James Yim Lee had been there. Bruce's closest friend, his training partner, the man who had helped Bruce build the foundation of everything he would become. James had been in the facility that rainy night, watching from the corner of the sparring room, witnessing a moment that would redefine everything they both believed about martial arts. James immediately understood what he was seeing, because he'd been waiting for something like this his entire life. Proof that martial arts wasn't about the size of the fighter, but the depth of their understanding. After Kenji left, James and Bruce sat in silence for 20 minutes. Finally, James spoke. That wasn't a fight. No, it was a conversation. "He'll never be the same. None of us are. That's the point." James never told anyone. Not for protection, not for secrecy, but because some moments are too important to weaponize through gossip. They're sacred. But James watched as Bruce integrated the lessons from that night into everything he taught moving forward. The patience, the non-resistance, the absolute faith in principles over technique. It was James who would later tell the story, but only after Bruce was gone. By 1970, Bruce Lee wasn't just a martial artist anymore. He was becoming a philosopher. His scripts started reflecting this shift. His teaching sessions grew deeper. He spoke less about defeating opponents and more about understanding the nature of conflict itself. Less about winning and more about the consciousness required to respond perfectly in any moment. Critics thought he was becoming soft. They were completely wrong. What they were witnessing was the opposite of softness. It was the hardness of absolute clarity, the unbreakable confidence that comes from having tested your understanding against the best of the best and discovering that size, strength, and technique were all secondary to something far more fundamental. That something was presence. Bruce had always known this intellectually, but Kenji made him feel it, had made him experience it directly from the other side, what it felt like to be a smaller, lighter opponent who moved through defenses like water through a sieve. That experience changed him. Not his techniques. His technique was already superior. But his teaching evolved, became more penetrating, more true. There was film from that night. Only one camera, hidden in the corner, capturing maybe 3 minutes of the encounter before it ran out. Grainy, black and white, impossible to see details, but clear enough to understand what was happening. A smaller man moving with such perfect timing against a larger opponent that every movement seemed to happen before it should. Only 5 people ever saw that footage. Bruce had it. James Yim Lee had a copy. Kenji had requested a copy years later. Bruce sent it. And 2 of Bruce's closest students knew about it, though they were never permitted to watch it. "The footage stays private," Bruce said simply. That moment was for him, not for history. But rumors persisted, especially after Bruce died in 1973. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the secret Kenji Nakamura match. The underground whispers transformed into internet legends decades later. Film historians searched for the mysterious footage. Martial artists speculated endlessly. The footage has never been publicly found. Some say it was destroyed. Some say Bruce's family kept it private. Some say it still exists, hidden in a private collection, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The mystery itself became part of the legend. But the real legacy wasn't in the footage. It was in what Bruce taught afterward. Every principle he emphasized in his final years, the ones that revolutionized martial arts philosophy, came directly from that encounter with Kenji. Do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one. Kenji had prayed for an easy victory. Bruce gave him something far more valuable, the strength to face a truth that destroyed his entire understanding of what power meant. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. Kenji knew the principles of Judo intellectually. Bruce showed him that knowledge without the deeper awareness beneath it was useless. If you always put limits on everything you do, physical or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. There are no limits. There are only plateaus, and you must not stay there. You must go beyond them. Kenji had plateaued. Bruce didn't defeat him by breaking through his limits. Bruce showed him that the limits he thought were immovable weren't limits at all. They were illusions. By the time Bruce Lee died in 1973, less than 4 years after the Kenji match, the martial arts world had been fundamentally transformed. Not by his fights, by his philosophy. And that philosophy, the one that preaches adaptation, awareness, consciousness, and the supremacy of understanding over power, came from a single night when he faced an Olympic champion in a private room and showed him something that no amount of medals or achievements could ever prepare you for: the reality of your own limitations, and the possibility of transcending them. Kenji Nakamura lived until 2001. In his final interview at age 83, when asked about his greatest teacher, he didn't mention his Olympic coaches. He didn't even use Bruce's name. He just said, "There was a night that changed everything. A man showed me that everything I thought I wasn't, and everything I thought was impossible actually was. I spent the rest of my life trying to understand what he understood in those 7 minutes." The interviewer asked what his name was. Kenji smiled and said, "Some secrets are more valuable than their revelation. The world needed to know his philosophy. It doesn't need to know every detail of how he discovered it." This is the hidden history that shaped the legend. Not the fights on film, not the championship victories, not the movie star fame that would follow in later adaptations, but a single night, a private moment, where a dragon showed an Olympic champion that true power has nothing to do with size, strength, or technique. True power is seeing. And when you truly see, when you become conscious of the principles operating beneath the reality of reality, no opponent can ever stand against you, because you're no longer fighting. You're simply responding to what is. Bruce Lee understood this, and everyone who came after him was changed by it, whether they ever knew the full story or not. If this story resonated with you, if the idea that consciousness and awareness trump physical dominance speaks to your soul, subscribe for more hidden histories that shaped the legends we thought we knew. Because the greatest stories aren't the ones everyone sees. They're the ones whispered in dojo hallways, shared between masters, lived in silence by those changed forever. Subscribe now and join us in uncovering the real stories behind the myths.